The other side isn't winning, it's an illusion. You know how they say there's this M like McDonald's or the market, the generations skip greatness? Well, it's been reversed. It's the way that energies are stolen from one generation, and it takes a great amount of effort. In fact, it takes all day, around the clock, ritual sacrifices that involve the most God pure, defiling rituals. To say F you, we're not going to go along with. So there's a hidden war between generations that we don't even look at and don't even acknowledge, and it has to do with the people in our own families, the people around us every day. Is that yes, there are 50% of the people on this planet, and maybe it's offset to where there's even more, a majority. Maybe it's something like 51 or 52%. Maybe it's a fearfi resonant number, as in 1.618 or 618. And energy is shunted from the rightful benefactor. Reality, dimensional reality, the way things are supposed to be, shunted away and drawn in to the computational subset, the computational system, to the unworthy. And that is what's happening. And we go about practicing this ritual. We ritualize this actually when we save somebody from peril. So here we are trying to do our best, pedaling away, realizing all the inequity and how to write things. And our entire lives, our whole holistic energies go into this. But in one gesture, in one moment, when you bail out a sibling or a kid from jail, right? And this doesn't happen on the other side because they're seen as martyrs if they do this, because they're not from a pure source. So when the pure sacrifice themselves for others, it is immediately, that energy is immediately transferred away from them. And that's what's really happening. They want you to disparage between race, colors, creeds, sexes, political stances, but the truth is the war is between generations. It's a generational war. And they want you to even further compartmentalize and disparately analyze between the boomers and the X generation and the millennials, but that doesn't even exist. Because what's happened is that this faction of dark souls, those who shouldn't be, those who shouldn't exist, those who should be upheld as examples of what not to be and the way not to go, they switched places because the pure lost their doctrine, they lost their way, so much so that the people that are around you, like the celebrities that you uphold and think are unique, are actually just ripoffs from a reality that you'll never see. There is a marker, right? There is an archetype. There is a rule, a golden mean that you are not going to be exposed to, you're not going to see, you're not going to experience. It's the world that you know should exist that doesn't. And in fact, it exists so much, even though you aren't exposed to it and you don't experience it, it exists so much and so profoundly that it is the golden mean. It does represent fearfi, right? And so what we live in is we live in the supplication and the indoctrination of a satanic, if you will, ritualistic. So that's their God. They are the jars that have been rejected by God, by purity, by the true monad. And they thus fully realize this because no matter how many lifetimes they are re-embodied into, and that's what they do. They have, so Cain required ritual on an altar, and he would live, like they say in the Bible, 7 times. When I say they, it was written by people. God didn't write that Bible, ignorant fundamentalists. God didn't write that Bible. In fact, that Bible is so full of holes. And going back to the gospel of truth, it's so full of jars that are errors. And from the agitation, that to correct this, we have to see and realize beyond the extent that they do, these dark ones, right, that their reality is always going to be a lesser reality. It'll be based on antiquities. It'll be based on the aging of carbon-based forms that no longer hold any value. Artifices, artifacts, right? Shapes and forms. And when you look at something that you think is just a masterpiece, and it doesn't follow the geometrical resonance of the golden mean or the fearfi formulation, and it deviates from this, you're looking at a lesser object. And that lesser object is also embedded in people, in their birthdays, right? This gets into the zodiac. It gets into what we would see, again, very pronounced as what's resounding is that you'll see that each man has a generational skip where success comes easily, but only easily because that man sacrificed every bit of purity and knew the way, because it resonated within him that he would sacrifice others and not sacrifice himself. And then naturally the next generation would learn, right? So in a sense, it really does get into the line of Seth, if you will, but I believe that also is a misnomer, misleading everyone, right? Everyone that's good. And everyone that's good is even further abstracted because it's really everyone that's pure. And even though you think you become corrupt because the world tries to corrupt you, tries to disprove you, puts you through hell, you are not allowed to live in the solution of purity and purification. So in essence, from a quantum physics standpoint, we live in the chiral reality that is really like the shit tank to the main frame source code of reality, which harkens back to phi or phi, the 1.618, right? 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. Yes, it goes on from there, but these are duplicate numbers that are seen with the addition of another digit, right? Once you get into this 3 and 4 and upward digit response, what those digits represent, what the 0 represents, is not a pi signet or signification, but it does represent the sphere, the completion of the monad. This all sounds like gibberish to most people, but if you are a pure one, if you feel corrupted, if you feel like you've lost your way, lost your path, right? The hardest thing for us to do is to take these false ones who preach a false indoctrination, cleaving off and stealing off from a life. It's so bizarre and so abstract to us here that something like a twin that died at childbirth, whose life force and life agenda was abducted, and you see the evil twin going about doing something that seems very critical to the times, you have to understand that you are looking at a false representation. In a sense, it might even harken back to a doppelganger or a copy of a copy. It's like multiplicity. At this point, the reason that the world before us, reality before us, seems so asinine, right? Like multiplicity, right? Go back and watch that one. It's very interesting. Is that there never was an understanding or a yearning for purity. There isn't a harkening back to the pure source, the pure center. That is not what these people crave. And they've been called NPC players. They've been called by many names. But to truly identify what they are and what they're doing and the entire premise to the code, right? And really, they're a false code. Okay, it gets into number systems, number subsets, non-Euclidean spherical mathematics, a lot of the things that John Dee was looking in. Like, you may look into this and look into this mirror and finally realize that you yourself are a mirror representation, a chiral representation of someone that you actually were put in the place of or willingly sacrificed throughout lifetimes. When I reference eras and repeat, why do you think things seem to be repeating, right? Because there was no and is no, like this reference to the Lamb's Book of Life, right? Or an inference that reality would play out in such a way that these generations, right? And you've got to take what the Bible states and other doctrine similar to the Bible about generations, because generational alliances, aspects. I mean, this gets into the Medicis and the Borgias, goes back to the Vatican, obviously the Knights of Malta, Operation Gladio, the Ophites, the Sarmatians, back into Babylon, and then reaching far back. But you don't need to reach that far back, because history, as far as history setting the pace, the tempo, the code of reality and how it becomes, those first 13 and then 23 generations, just like the Habsburg and the Habsburg lit, there's enough momentum built up to justify the antiquity of a historical past, but there's still no momentum that will carry through the false quasi-faux ontology or nature of reality that cleaves off from the pure source, the pure center. So it takes a tremendous amount of effort to sacrifice children from their perspective. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to continue to violate those who are of the pure source. And even more so, these aren't just random kids that are being abducted, accosted, and ritualistically sacrificed. No, these are what you might even refer to as elementals, where you're keeping this reality hung, the reality of the pure source, right? And it exists in each one of us who's an aspect to the pure source, but we all are pointing fingers at one another because we look like the worst people. We're made to look like the deadbeats. We're made to look like the drug addicts. We're made to look like the losers. And when you go, if you were to critically take an eye and go back and look at someone's life and see where it was that everything seemed to go haywire or wrong, there were critical points where they sacrificed themselves, which this dark side, this dark alliance is what it is, could never do. They do not sacrifice themselves for others. They never will, unless they're up on a stage and it's something that is done as an act. Somebody has to be watching. They have to get corporeal, carnal, temporal credit. They live in the world of absolutes because they never will have an absolute, because there is no self there. And so they want the pure ones to question themselves. They want those from the pure source, emanating from the pure source, to question their own existence. And what's more is that the pure ones are supposed to come to a place that's harken back to Abrahamic traditions, right? Where it wasn't just a son that was to be sacrificed, and it wasn't just a wife that would always sin against you and defile you, right? And to go against the purity in the God-given word. No, it was you as the strength of God, the strength of the pure source, to not be able to sacrifice the next generation that you know is evil because you are good. We've been put in this stalemate, this dichotomy, where we never would sacrifice our own, even if our own was something that was heavily machinated against us, to the point where it was supplanted, for this next generation son was supplanted in our lives, and to cause us to shunt off and derail the true great work, which is the return to purity and the return to the pure source. It's not even that difficult to do this, but it is the hardest thing to do. Right? From an outside perspective, it's like if you were to look at us as zeros and ones, you'd fully see that operationally it only takes the erasure of this digitized, codified, abstract error, right, in correction. But once it's accepted, the error code is accepted, right? That the third point, instead of a duality, right, where the pure source, those representing the pure source, would invariably have the power, and we're graced with the power. So we will live in a chiral aspect to a falsified world until that happens. And so that's why the Pope sits on the throne until God's return. That is until the pure source returns, until the order is set back, the ordis is set back to its original source, its original code. But until then, all the wrong people are in charge, right? Because they continue on the ritualization to hedonistically go about debauchery as, not for fun, but as an expression that this is who we are. It's not difficult for them to do this. In actuality, if it's not a popularity contest, they'll take a knife to a newborn's throat. They will, without being put under the specter of morality, they're the first to cheat on a spouse that they claim that they would never cheat on. They're the first to sell their entire family off and start a new family. They're the true psychopaths, the true sociopaths, right? They are borderlines. They are insane, right? But what they do is they switcheroo everything to where they make the good, the pure, those from the pure source, right? Those who are placed into a falsified chiral reality minority situation, right? And so if you can identify with this, you probably are one of the pure ones, right? And you're in so deep that you're now surrounded by those where you would have to look at them and ask yourself the one basic question is, would they sacrifice themselves for you? or would they sacrifice you? And I think that most of us already know the answer because we already have been sacrificed willingly. And so these are witches, these are druids, these are warlocks, okay? These are people who, by day, seem very charitable, and at night, like Benjamin Franklin, they are aspects, or the bonesmen, the bushes, they are aspects to the Hellfire Club, right? And the bushes, right? They are those who do evil by night and good by day. They are a stark, striking dichotomy that is oftentimes misrepresented as death.